Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Creating an M365 Copilot Champions Community webinar. We are really excited to continue our conversation on Copilot in our webinar series today, really focusing in on that adoption journey and how we can get champions onboarded and enable us to be as successful as possible when it comes to that enablement and adoption journey. So today we've got a few different things to cover, and I'd like to just first of all introduce myself for those that don't know me. My name is Katie McCallum. I've been around at WM for a long old time now, so hopefully we've crossed paths if you've worked with us before. I am one of the adoption and change capability leads and specialising in all things adoption change management. Also looking at our modern workplace strategy as a whole and helping you to establish your ongoing roadmap, given all the updates and exciting new technology we're seeing in the Microsoft stack. And I'm particularly focused in now on Copilot and AI in the workplace. So, how can we ensure an effective enablement? How can we start to build out this new technology? And what does it mean to your organisation? And I'd like to introduce Jo, who's joining me on the call today.
Hi everyone, my name is Jo Matthews. I also sit in the adoption and change management space, so really thinking about how people are using technology. I actually have been a Copilot champion myself recently, rolling out Copilot across WM Reply, so I can really speak from experience in terms of some lessons learned and what's really worked for us internally. And yeah, just think Copilot's really exciting new release. Everyone's talking about it, it's such a hot topic. So obviously I wanted to get involved in this webinar series.
Great stuff. Cool. So yeah, really excited to speak to you today. Of course, as ever, we want to make sure that we make this really work for you, and we want to hear your questions. So please do drop those into the chat. We've got about half an hour of things we want to share with you, and then we will be moving into a Q&A. We've got some questions already sent to us, but we want to hear all the questions you have as we go along, and we will get back to them at the end. So do drop those into the Q&A, and we will get to them later on. Great stuff. So what are we going to cover today? Some key things that we want to get across to you when it comes to champions and Copilot. So as you probably can already imagine, given the topic of this webinar, we think that champions are pretty critical and key to your success with Copilot. So we'll share a little bit more about that and what a champion's role can bring to your enablement. When we have actually established that and we say, okay, yeah, we definitely want to go ahead and drive Champions Network to help us with this process, how do we actually identify and how do we onboard those champions effectively? Once we have done that, we of course want to think about how we manage them, how we enable them, what are the channels that we set up, what are the key ways that we train and engage this audience. So we'll talk about managing and enabling our community too. A huge part of the ask around Copilot, outside of champions of course as well, is how do we measure Copilot's impact? And actually what we want to kind of share with you today is that we think champions are really key and can drive a lot of insights and can really help us set up an A/B testing model and start to measure impact and ROI that we are seeing from Copilot with the different audiences we're enabling. And champions can drive that insight and help us with that process, and we'll share a bit more about that. We then want to share with you a little bit about the MS Champions platform that is available to everybody. So if you haven't seen that before, that's a quick insight. If you've not got a Champions community, it's a quick start way of getting set up and starting to embed some of the key principles around champions in your organisation. Then we'll jump into a Q&A, and then we'll remind you of the webinar coming up soon as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jo first, and we're really going to think about why champions are so critical when it comes to Copilot.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, let's talk about using champions in Copilot rollouts specifically. But first of all, a step back. Why would we use champions in any change? So we know that champion communities are really there to help us drive engagement from the bottom up. It's to have people on the ground helping you really express the benefits of what a new technology or a change is going to bring to an organisation. It can really help you facilitate some of that peer-led support. So if someone kind of thinks, oh, I don't have time to go to a formal training session, or I feel a bit embarrassed to ask someone senior to go through that again, they've got a peer sat next to them who can give them that one-to-one support, who can be there to say, oh, actually, let me just show you quickly now if you've got 5 minutes, rather than having to go through and kind of find the right content. Let's just get people helping each other. And ultimately, that's going to help us create a really positive, supportive culture for change. And it gives us an opportunity to get lots of feedback as well on how are people finding change at the moment? How are they finding all these different tools that we're rolling out? Or how are they finding the amount of change that's happening? Is it feeling manageable? And we can use that champions community to feed back from end users on how things are going and how they're feeling. So this can apply to any change we're rolling out, whether it's technology, whether it's change around a complete restructure. We can use champions across the board. So why do we think it's really worth talking to you about champions specifically with Copilot today? First of all, Copilot is coming into effect across so many different of our M365 tools. So we can use Copilot now across PowerPoint, we've got it in Excel, we've got it coming into Microsoft Viva, we've got it in Power Platform. And actually, we're not expecting every person to use every single element of Copilot in their role. What we see is that different functionalities within Copilot are going to help different people in their role each day. So what we need to think about is having those boots on the ground, to have someone who sits in that role who can say, yeah, this is how it's helped me specifically in my role, and this is how I can see it helping other people who do jobs similar to me. And then that again gives us that peer-to-peer learning opportunity to actually work with people to say, this is a specific example of how it's helped me. I appreciate that the world of Copilot is big and it's a bit scary and there's lots of different things we can do, and I don't expect you to understand the full art of the possible necessarily. But actually, I've been playing around with this for a while because I'm a champion and I've discovered these things that have really helped me day to day. So I'm going to go and share that with the people sitting next to me, share that with my team, and share the little things that have saved me time, that have saved me effort in my job role, and make sure other people understand what's there to help them specifically, rather than us always talking about the overall picture when it comes to Copilot. The other thing is, it is fairly intuitive. Once you really understand the art of the possible and you understand what's capable within Copilot, you don't need an awful lot of formal training. And it's all about kind of creating this fail-safe environment where people can go and just give it a try. So actually what's nice is when we bring in this peer-to-peer learning, we're not asking people to spend loads of time doing formal demos with someone. We're just saying, actually, can you spend a short bit of time doing a direct show and tell with someone to say, oh, this is a quick fix that I learned in Copilot, or this is something I used the other day and it saved me half an hour of a boring admin task, and really just raising awareness of, again, that art of the possible that's specific to the people working around them. And so effectively what we're doing here is we're creating regular, short, quick and easy to access support for people, rather than them having to go off to formal training sessions, take time out of their days, schedule things in the diary. We're making it easier than ever by having someone sat next to them to be able to support them on their Copilot journey. So how do we find champions to come in and help us roll out Copilot, and what does an ideal champion look like? So what makes a great champion? Now, when we had to just say, pull someone out of the air, if you wanted someone to really come and help you drive a new piece of technology, in this case, Copilot, of course, we want them to be passionate about that technology. We want someone to generally have a passion for modern work, and someone who has that eagerness to really say, this is interesting to me. I want to take my time out of my day to learn about this and come and really start to understand, because this sounds cool. This is the future I'm looking at here and I want to get involved. However, it's not just about what you want as a champion, it's also making sure that you've got that willingness to take the time to support others, and you're really helpful in that sense as well. And inspiring. It's understanding that actually some people might hear that, you know, new tech, Copilot, this sounds like a bit futuristic for me. I'm happy doing things in my old ways. And it's having someone that's able to take the time and understanding to go, yeah, I get that. But if you just give me 5-10 minutes, I can show you some of the things that might really help you quickly and easily, and just gently starting to introduce things to people in that sense as well, and starting to get the benefits through to some people that might perhaps initially be a bit of a resistor. Of course, we want people to be role modeling these behaviours as well. And we often talk about this in leadership positions too. We really need people who are going to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So we want people who are going to be out there using it, going to be out there using Copilot, bring it into part of their day-to-day role, rather than someone who just goes, yeah, it all sounds great, the technology is really cool. Let's see them using it then. Tell us that you've done something on Copilot in the time that it's saved you. And ultimately, whilst we do want these champions to become experts in Copilot, they don't necessarily need to be someone that is super techie. We're going to touch on that again a bit more in the next slide. But ultimately, we're expecting someone to become a champion, become an expert as they move through their champion journey. But initially, it's okay if they're a little bit, concerned about new technology, perhaps if they're not someone that naturally embraces technology. Actually, if we can say, as long as you've got the passion and the willingness to get on board with this, to understand it and to help us share it, then come along with us, get on this champion journey, and you will become that expert along the way. So what else might we think about when we're onboarding our champions? First of all, and this I think is particularly important when it comes to Copilot, is we do want to make sure that we have a range of roles and different use cases coming through in our champions community. That's because, as we said, not every person is going to use Copilot in the same way. Certain functionality is going to be useful to certain roles, so we need to get that representation across the organisation. It might be that one person works very heavily on Word in lots of heavy Word documents, and they need to understand how it can help them write a document for them or draft something for them, whereas someone else might be there in a very technical role working in Power Platform every day, and they need to understand how Copilot can help them in their role. So what we need then is to have champions across those roles as well to help them share that experience using the functionality that is relevant to them. As we touched on before as well, we do want different skill sets. It doesn't need to necessarily be that everyone is super tech savvy. Now, an example I might have with this is, let's use Excel as an example. We know there are some people out there who love Excel, use it every day, those sort of keyboard wizards that don't even touch the mouse and go and do their thing on Excel. And there's other people that can't imagine anything worse than having to understand something in an Excel document. But what's interesting to think about is that Copilot can help both of those people. There's going to be someone who is super tech, very, very involved in the Excel, and actually Copilot can be there to help them make sense of some very, very complicated formula, different tables, etc., and help them to really dive deeper into lots of information and make sense of that information. And then you might have Copilot being used for that other person that thinks, oh, I hate having to do something in Excel, just to write a very simple formula. And it might be a case of just asking, in this particular cell, can you write a formula that's going to tell me this particular answer? And both of those people can benefit from Copilot just in one tool, despite having a very, very different skill set. Now, of course, as we do with all champions communities, we want to make sure that we've got leadership representation as well. We do not go on about this enough as adoption and change management consultants. We have to make sure that we have some seniority and leadership positions really driving this from the top down as well. We need to make sure that we've got leaders who are there to say, yeah, I totally back this, and who they can share examples of how this is helping them in their role as well, in order to inspire the rest of the organisation to get on board. It really does make a difference, and it's not something we want to forget when it comes to Copilot. And lastly, of course, thinking about, actually, are there some of those people that initially go, oh, this all sounds a bit futuristic for me. I'm happy doing things in my old ways of working. I don't need this stuff. I don't want a robot to do my job for me. All these kind of classic pushbacks that we get when it comes to things like Copilot. And actually, if we can turn some of those people's heads early, for them to understand the benefits, show them some of the direct benefits for them, and get them on board as a champion early, that can really help us to, first of all, test different ways to overcome some of those resistances that we see early on and bring them in so we can kind of plan for it down the line. And also so that we can just get those people on board and they can put their hands up and say, do you know what? I wasn't sold on this at first, but now I've gone and had a play with it, I can really understand the benefits for me. So it's really useful to have some of those roles throughout the journey, bring them in as champions so we can start to think about how we're going to manage those particular challenging groups going forwards. Now, for anyone who's been on that EAP or early access program when it comes to Copilot as well, this could be a natural kind of group for you to bring on as your ongoing champion community as well. At the end of the day, they've had that early hands-on experience of using Copilot for themselves. They understand how it directly impacts them in their role. And hopefully by the end of that EAP, they're going to be really enthusiastic for this new technology. So absolutely think about using that initial pilot or EAP group as your champions going forwards. I would just kind of point out to make sure you think about, are we hitting all those different roles from this EAP group? Are we hitting people from different levels of leadership positions right down to the bottom as well? So we've got peer level all throughout our group. So don't just rely on your EAP group, just double check that you've got that representation as well. But equally, if we've got people on board, let's try to continue them on this journey through and use them to really help us drive that engagement going forwards. So when it comes to onboarding our champions and really saying, well, what's in it for me right now? Why would I get involved with this? Why do I want to put time and effort into thinking about rolling this out right now if actually it's going to cost me, extra time out my day and I could just get on board with everyone else? So what a champion's going to get is, first of all, the same everyone else is going to get. Let's not forget that they are going to get all the same communications as everyone else. They're going to get those success stories coming through. They can start to see all the same kind of support materials there. So they've got all that to come down the line. But equally, as a champion, we really need to make sure that we're pushing the additional benefits of getting on that champion community and the things that they're going to get out of it. So first of all, it might be that they're going to get access before anyone else. It's bringing in that benefit of, actually, you know what, this is a really hot topic right now. This is something that people are talking about across the board. This is something people are really excited about, and you're going to get early access to it and getting some people excited by that. Also, on top of that, if you stick with us and you push this, you're going to get an expert status. And it might be that actually we're going to add a badge to that as well. And it's going to really show people that you're someone to go to and show you that kind of skill set that you've got in your role. Let's be honest, some people might do that because they say, great, promotion period's coming up. That's really going to help me show that I've developed a new skill. And that's okay. We want people to be proud of having this kind of status and knowledge behind them. And let's remind them that they're going to have that to take forwards and really be able to show that off as they go throughout this journey as well. On top of that, they're going to get extra support and training throughout this, so they really can take up that expert status. And we're going to create a form of competition for them as well, which we're going to talk to you again about shortly. But it's all about saying, right, can you become the best at this? Can you be someone that's really going to understand this and be able to show other people what you can really take away from this? And the best way of doing that is often with a bit of competition, maybe having a leaderboard status, etc., coming in there as well. Hopefully that starts to get some people on board. And obviously we then just need to say, you're going to get all of these things on the right hand side. If you can then give us a little bit of your time and energy in terms of perhaps participating in some initial testing, which Katie's going to talk through shortly. Make sure that you're then willing to share that knowledge with other people and communicate out what you've learned to the rest of the business as well as your direct peers. We are going to ask you to attend some regular calls with us and really support other people, part of this champions community, and create this environment where you're telling each other what you're working on, and ultimately stay up to date with Copilot as well. As we know, Copilot is constantly getting updates coming. There's constantly new tools and new things being invested into Copilot all the time. So it's not just a case of learning what's available right now, but keeping up to date with that knowledge going forwards as well. So
Great.
I'm now going to hand over to Katie, who's going to talk about how to manage your Copilot community.
Great, thank you, Jo. Yeah, exactly. So I think now that we've understood what our key messaging are to champions, we understand, who we've got in there and got a really good group of people that we're confident can take this forward with the right set of skills and, as Joe said, across different roles, different appetites for technology. And we've articulated the what's in it for me. Let's just think now about how we actually manage that community sort of day to day. What does that look like over a 3-6 month period as you first enable Copilot? So first, let's have a think about some of the channels, the typical change management sort of channels for us to be able to communicate, train and coach people effectively. So of course, we need to have a kind of drumbeat of communications that land with people. We will, with our champions, have an onboarding session for them, and they will also attend an onboarding session just as an EAP or Copilot licensed participant anyway. So they will get that fundamental information. As part of the EAP or pilot community, those who get those first set of licenses, we want to have a dedicated area, and we think this should be a Teams channel, where we can share daily communications, top tips, any asks of them, as well as participants, and the latest, greatest functionality as the tool evolves. So we think a Teams channel will help drive that daily communications. Nothing novel here, but getting that set up and active is really important to making the most of our community and our participants in an EAP or pilot as a whole. We always want to have a really nice set of materials that are going to be self-service. Not everybody wants to drop in, not everybody wants to ask a question. We know this from our enablement of other tools like Teams or Power Platform, whatever it may be. We need to have a multi-channel training approach. So we will have a SharePoint hub, a site that can be linked and connected to the team in question, or just added as a tab on the team where people could quickly and easily get to quick start guides. We really recommend building out sort of day in the life for different role types and functions, and we're doing this with a few customers live in projects at the moment. One real focus area that we haven't spoken to much yet on today's call is around prompt engineering. So we all know that Copilot is our co-pilot, not our autopilot, and we need to get better as the tool evolves and it learns about us, and the functionality evolves as well. We also need to get better at using it. So it's not simply kind of a one-liner that's going to get the most out of the technology. We know we need to drive some context. So we need to have materials on prompt engineering where people know, yeah, I actually need to revise and refine my prompts to get the most out of Copilot in the different apps that it surfaces within. Of course, we'd have things like FAQs, and another really good thing is having success stories. Now, these might sit on the SharePoint hub, but we also recommend dripping those into the Teams channel for the whole of your Copilot audience. And ideally, we'd be getting people excited enough to be sharing those themselves, which we'll come on to in a second. Absolutely, we need regular training and drop-ins. We would have, those onboarding sessions, whether that's as a champion or to the whole program itself. But we'd want to have those over time. I think there's two angles to that. There are looking at it in a per app basis. So if I'm a heavy Word user or a heavy, I'm in a lot of Teams meetings, I'm going to really benefit from those transcript and summary features and asking questions about the content of a meeting. I can join dedicated sessions on those different applications. But also, what about scenario based? So can we look at a process that is executed in an organization that might touch across several different functions? Maybe that's appraisals or payroll or something, and all the places where Copilot can intersect with that process as well. So scenario and function and application-based training. The champions will enter a world where all of these things are supporting the Copilot community as a whole, but we want to give them that extra special helping hand, because as Joe articulated in the previous slide, we are asking them to give some extra of their time, them to be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of adoption and understanding the tool, and give us that role-based insight as well. So we need dedicated space to communicate with them regularly, and we'll give them that kind of white glove approach. So we want to have champions briefings, regular training and drop-in sessions that are dedicated just to them. Really recommend that from a kind of functional perspective, we have a private channel in the same team as the overarching Teams channel is, so we can have dedicated conversations with champions and they can share in there too, and we can share functional messages and weekly updates from the project as well. I think there is cause for a little bit more visibility for the champions to have a little bit more visibility on what the overarching project is trying to achieve and the twists and turns along the way. You know, we're looking to see where impact can be in a certain area, and be a bit more honest with them about, you know, what the next 6 months might look like as we explore rollout. You know, are we looking to enable the majority of the organization? Are we really just testing this and maybe not proceeding with it? Are there certain functions where we've got real target? And we can be a little bit more honest about the project with our champions to get them more invested. I'm not saying kind of, you know, everything about it, but, you know, as champions, they have a more sort of dedicated role when it comes to deciding the future of this technology in the organization. Now we've got those channels set up, we can actually think about kind of the key pillars and principles of engagement, if you like, for our champions. So very functionally, if we just skip over to the next slide, very, very functionally, of course, they need access to Copilot. And in an ideal world, they get it before everyone else. They don't have to. If they get it at the same point as everyone else, you know, we can work with that to enable them to get a kind of more detailed understanding more quickly and kind of accelerate their learning when it comes to the technology as well. But we need to make sure that they have that more detailed understanding, so it can kind of advance their capability when it comes to helping others. The next is really around building enthusiasm. So we really want this to be an exciting space. We want this to be, you know, fairly informal when we have our champions catch up, really honest. People can share the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to their Copilot results. And you know, to enable us to build that, we want to show them and get them excited about the art of the possible. Show them the bounds of the tool. What is the latest, greatest updates from Microsoft about the roadmap and what's coming down the line with Copilot? So they know it's not just what we're looking at now in terms of a feature set, but there's a kind of, you know, we're looking 6 months ahead at all the cool things that are coming. So keeping them up to date and informed on that is going to be really important and will help to drive that enthusiasm as well. Having that more informal tone will help with the next one, which is really about building a community, an honest community who feel comfortable sharing feedback, and a real space for them to you know, proactively be sharing into that private channel for champions and even into the wider channel as well. We don't want our communication to champions to purely be top down and us to be saying, okay, here's what we need you to have a test of next, or here's the key messages for the next couple of weeks when it comes to engaging the rest of the audience. We want them to share back. We want them to share success stories. So we need to enter into it with the ambition of making this a really open space. And it might be, to get that rolling, you might have a few kind of friends and family champions who you can ask, sort of side them and ask, can you share some updates into the channel to get things rolling? And we can start to build that engagement type of atmosphere where people feel comfortable sharing and they don't think it's just a space for formal communication. We want to make sure, you know, that kind of ties into the build enthusiasm piece as well. Is all about showing those latest developments. Like when we hear from things from Ignite, when we hear about what's coming down the track, that we share those with champions. We link them to, you know, a YouTube video that's sharing the latest, greatest features that are coming. We keep them in the know, both, as I said, around the project, but also around the technology and how it's evolving in the different app services. So it's not just a set in stone from day one where we are today. They feel that they are part of an evolving journey with this technology. And the final thing really is this culture of just give it a try. We really want people to feel super comfortable with that. And again, we can land this kind of messaging by driving a fairly informal tone and making sure that we have a culture of like, oh, I gave this a go and I got a terrible result, so I tried again. And, you know, and we can share into the champions community. Well, we've maybe not got the most out of Copilot and had to edit our approach. And yeah. You know, we don't want people to be worried about getting things wrong. This isn't really a space for that. There needs to be a real culture of giving it a go. So the next thing we really want to think about, or this will really enable, which is great, is around our prompt engineering piece I spoke about before. So this is where we start to think about our champions as not just mediums to cascade generalized messages to the whole organization, but as people who can give us like those role-based insights we spoke about earlier. So a key pivot for this will be all around user interviews. So with these champions, they can act as a bit of a focus group for us. We can't speak to the full 300. And I don't know if there'll be a question in the Q&A that's popped up yet around, the number of licenses that you have to get, but as a minimum, Microsoft requests, you have to have 300 licenses to get started with Copilot. So we already know it's very difficult for any organization to have enough resource to be speaking to and engaging with all 300 people. So the champions also act as a focus group. We can build out those user interviews with them and get some of their time where we ask them key questions about their ways of working and start to work out what are their typical tasks in role, and we can map those to the capability of Copilot. So we're going to get those role-based insights from the champion interviews. This will help us with our adoption campaign because we will be able to start to build out some role-specific prompts in the different app services that Copilot features in identified. And we will have a prompt engineering campaign anyway, this kind of revise and refine piece about, getting better at working with Copilot. But we can even target that even further now by working with different functions, different audiences in the types of activities they do every day. So we can say, look, if we're working with Excel in trying to get to highlight a variant of revenue across these 100 cells, how do we do that more easily? That's not going to resonate with someone necessarily in internal comms. So we need to be speaking in their language and sharing examples in either our day in the life materials or in a video campaign or in more targeted comms that resonates with people about this revise and refine message. And we want to land that quality results come from quality prompts. And actually, we can all say we think we know what quality prompts mean, but it's our champions who are going to tell us what quality prompts really mean in their functional area. And I always really like this. It's a material from Microsoft around the ingredients for a perfect prompt. And it just shows the kind of length of prompt that we've got there. Actually, it takes me a minute or so to think about and write this in full, rather than just saying, I just want to create a material or draft an email to this person on X point. If we give it all the relevant context, if we have a goal, if we talk about the formatting in the prompt, we want to give it a source, whether that's just saying to focus generally on email or Teams chat, or we actually give it a document to work from, that is going to improve our results. And then you can also set an expectation as well. So this is a really good example of, this is the sort of length of prompt that will get the most out of Copilot. It's not a kind of one sentence job if you really want to get a really brilliant output.
Katie, I have to just point out as well, something I hadn't actually noticed before, just GCSE, nice and easy to remember.
That's true. That's true. I like that, GCSE.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, really easy to draw that out. And that's a good way of checking when you pop a prompt into Copilot. Has it met all four of these things? Have I given it a goal? Have I given it a context? Have I given it a source and an expectation? And that will be different for everyone. And so when we talk about this, we can talk about it at a high level. Okay, we all understand that. We can hear those 4 words and go, okay, I need to put more in my prompts. But how do we make that really resonate and sing with people in different business areas? And champions are going to be key to that. Cool. So with all that in mind, we want to keep our champions engaged through this process. We don't want to start off with a bang and get really excited and involved and it really tail off. We need to keep them engaged over time. And there's a couple of key things that we can do to ensure this. The first is communicating regularly. So I said daily comms in there. Maybe it's not every day, but it needs to be significant through the week. Maybe it's a top tip one day, maybe it's a success story the next. We're encouraging friends and family to post in there too, and hopefully it will get quite organic and actually people will be contributing into that community. But we want to have regular touch points, whether that's a wrap up weekly post at the end of the week, whether that's a certain day where we do top tips. We need to get that communications out there and that people see that drip feed and build that knowledge and capability over time. That goes for our whole audience, and it also goes for our champions and what they're bringing to their role with us as well. We've got this clarification of role and responsibilities here, which I think is really, really key to do at the start of the project, but we also want to do that throughout. So, it might be worth, as well as our kind of drop-ins, having a regular, maybe it's monthly, champions check-in call where we make the asks of them again. And we ask, as with anyone with a Copilot license, it might be that your organization is thinking, okay, unless people contribute back and share feedback, maybe they don't maintain their license. Maybe that's a harsh approach, but I think, especially with our champions audience, we've made real asks of them and they're getting a lot, as part of their license, they're getting a lot of support from us. So we do need to make sure that we get that gives and gets, and that is clarified both at the start and throughout the project as well. The next is around facilitating discussions, so bringing people together. So if we've heard something from different champions in different areas of the business, whether that's us sharing a success story into the team channel and mentioning someone from finance and saying, oh, this person from HR was asking about a similar thing last week. They'd, I think you guys would love to chat about this. I think it would really resonate with you. So bringing people together from our champions community and facilitating discussions. We'll of course have, we might have a couple of different champions within a function who would work together, but we don't want them to work in isolation. We want there to be inspiration and stories that resonate across the whole organization, across the whole champions community. So our role in this as kind of people running this project is bringing people together and making sure people are hearing all the great stuff that's going on across the organization with Copilot. The next is really like that celebrating success and giving people that pat on the back. So we want to recognize where if a champion's done a really great job of bringing together a group of people and working with them and, bringing on board a resistor, or they've gone ahead and run their own separate session with people with Copilot in their functional area, or shared a really great success story. We want to recognize and reward that effort. So we want to be posting onto the team's channel and praising people using the praise feature. We could look at reward structure, so that could be just merchandise, or it could be if you get buy-in from a company perspective, prizes for key champions who are really forging the way with driving engagement. It's up to you. We always recommend a kind of driving a level of kind of gamification and people working towards something. Maybe that's just like actual badges to say, now you're an expert or you're a hero, and graduating your champions across that, or it could be those physical prizes if you've got buy-in to be able to supply those. And this ties into the last point, which is all about creating competition. By celebrating success, we get everybody wants to do well in their cohort. We want to praise people. We want to bring forward where people are doing a really fantastic job, and we want to, really drive a level of competition between champion-friendly competition, of course, between our champions, so that people want to have a pat on the back and say it's a job well done. And we can do this in various ways. We can look at a bit of a leaderboard. We could have like champion of the month or champion of the week who's done a really great job. So how do we create that friendly competition and friendly atmosphere where people want to do well and stand out in the Copilot space? So there's some. Go on, Jo.
Sorry, Katie. I'm actually going to jump in and talk about that point now, I think, and just go into this in a little bit more detail. I think I would say that the communicating regularly part and facilitating discussions is probably the easy part there. We do this regularly. We work with champions a lot, and we know how to communicate, generally speaking, and as change managers. But where some of those more difficult elements can come in are how do you really clarify what someone's roles are and what they need to do as a champion, and make sure people are actually doing it as well. How do you have that visual that people are actually getting on and doing their role as a champion? And okay, create competition, great, but what does that actually look like? I don't have time to go away and create this whole leaderboard and create a new app for this. And actually, I think a lot of people don't know that there is already a platform up and running on Microsoft. It's free to go ahead and use for the Champions Management platform. So I just want to show that really quickly as a nice way of bringing some of these things together with technology that already exists. This is not mutually exclusive to everything Katie talked about before in terms of setting up Teams channels to communicate with people and get people talking to each other. This is another layer on top to help, like I said, with some of those task allocations with creating some competition, etc. So let's go on to the next screen. The Champions Management platform, you can search it and download it nice and easily. Effectively, it gives you this platform to be able to create a change program. You can add people into that program nice and easily just from your standard kind of team search, and you can start to assign them to different criteria across the board as well. And it gives you lots of options to go in and manage that community of champions in there. And one of those things that we can do is start to create this leaderboard that brings in that element of competition, as we were saying. So you can start to effectively give champions different tasks that they have to do, or different accomplishments they might want to achieve. And then they can effectively compete with one another to say, oh, well, I've done this and I got this person on board, so I get to tick that box, and starts to create a bit of competition in there. And people can visually see how they're doing in comparison to those other champions as well. So David, I'm not sure with your message from SSE whether that's something you guys have tried before and you've tested this out. It might be something you want to look into. You can also really nice and easy on this platform, give people that badge around their name as well. So you could put someone down as I'm a Copilot champion. We know that with people working from home, it's actually quite hard to know who is my champion I need to go to. So if we can just show it visually around people's profile pictures, say, reach out to me if you've, got any questions on Copilot, then it helps people, A, get their name out there as someone to help. And also, it gives you a little bit of a sense of pride and empowerment of, yeah, I'm a champion. It says it right there and it's on my name, and just gives people that kind of little bit of recognition for themselves as well. You can then go even further with this. We've had a question around gamification as well, and you can go into this even further, and you can start to create these tournaments where actually you can use this both for champions as well as your end users to start to create different things that they can do to test out stuff. It can start to build into that leadership more, create different tasks, etc. So it's just something I'd recommend going away, having a look, see if that starts to answer some of those questions as to how do you create that sense of competition. How can we manage this in one place without having to, put loads and loads of time and effort as a project team into this? And it might just be something that you find useful going forwards, whether it's for Copilot or another champion opportunity. It's just worth having a look. Back over to you, Katie.
Great stuff. And we are running a bit longer than we thought we were going to. So sorry about that, but there's lots of exciting things to say about the champion's impact on enablement of Copilot. The next section and kind of final major section before we go to questions is the fact that our champions community don't have to, are not just focused on enabling adoption. They actually can help define your ongoing roadmap and recommendation and even a business case for Copilot and AI in the workplace moving forward. So we really want to focus now on A/B testing and measurement and how champions can help with that. So a very quick reminder on what makes successful Copilot enablement. I'm not going to go through every point here. The headlines really are that we want in our early Copilot enablement to have understood where the key processes where Copilot can have impact, and that can be in those different functional areas we talked about. We want to have users who are really empowered to effectively use Copilot with appropriate prompt engineering, and I've just shared before how champions can have impact there. If we move over to the right side of the screen, we want to manage the perception of Copilot and AI in the workplace. So we want to make sure that people understand this is to complement them and help drive innovation and creation rather than replacing them. And we also want this first cohort of users to really understand the bounds of the tool, when it's usable, when it isn't. There are limitations, it's not for everything, and become advocates for that use, of which champions are a huge part of that. But I guess the kind of two middle pillars of things we haven't talked about, we're going to talk about now, is about, I think, successful Copilot enablement when we first test it out with those first 300 licenses, whether you're on the EAP or not, is about comprehensively measuring impact and ROI that Copilot can bring. And ultimately, depending on what the needs of the organization are, maybe building out a business case or a recommendation or a roadmap for how you're going to move forward with Copilot and AI as well. So I guess the next thing to remember really is champions are going to be key to this middle column, is this measurement piece as well as the adoption piece. So I guess one thing to think about when we're looking at measurement is some key goals and metrics when it comes to what we want to get out of Copilot. And here are some examples. These are not set in stone, but we know we need to understand how many users across the organization will truly benefit from this. The number of users, whether that's, okay, these functions will and these won't. People who maybe are doing more content creation and more in that kind of knowledge worker space, who is actually going to benefit? How many users should we be licensing long term? The next is how often are people using Copilot in the different app surfaces? Am I somebody who works predominantly in Word and Outlook, and I'm going to mostly use it there, and I won't get loads of use out of it in PowerPoint and Excel? That's fine. We probably don't expect everybody to be working with Copilot in all of the 7 major apps, and it's ever expanding. So we don't expect to justify Copilot, everyone would have to use it everywhere, but we do need to understand how often people would use it. It's all very well if somebody uses it, once a month to do some work in Excel because they're just to speed up some processes around some metrics that need to be shared back. But if they're not using it anywhere else, is that truly worth it for them to be licensed? The next one is the big one, and this really ties into what we're calling our A/B testing approach. So this is time saved. So how can we compare a user with Copilot doing a task versus a user without Copilot doing a task? And we want to start to look at measuring the actual time saved on different tasks in the organization. And by using frequency of usage and how many users do that task, we can actually extrapolate that out and put a numeric value to the time saving at different levels in the organization. And we can use industry standard benchmark salaries as well to start to do this and present this to our very senior stakeholders. The other thing as well to think about is we don't want to just save time. We want to make sure that any output from Copilot is of quality. So we want to make sure that people, whatever the prompt is and whatever they're getting out of it, if they compare it with and without Copilot, it is worth doing. The quality of the first draft that Copilot produces, or even the adjusted draft, is worth the 10. If it's 10 minutes saved, great. Is it worth those 10 minutes saved? Am I going to go and have to re-edit that? Is it of the quality we would expect if the person had done it themselves? And then, of course, we want to know how people feel. There's lots of stats out there, and Microsoft have recently published their work trend index, where we're seeing, the stats of people who would want to keep Copilot. I've even heard some things from Microsoft around, would you take a free lunch every month or would you have Copilot? And it's like 67% of people would take Copilot. So significant user satisfaction there. But how do we measure that? How do we measure engagement and satisfaction on the different applications and advocate their use versus, and also overall, are users satisfied with the capability to be able to justify us maybe enabling a wider rollout? So when it comes to A/B testing, we really recommend, if you're looking to drive that ROI and business value, this is going to be really key and really helpful for you when you're kind of trying to think about the next steps, the recommendation and roadmap for the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months with Copilot. If you've got your first 300 licensed, you're thinking, okay, what's next? Is this worth our time? If you're on the EAP, you're kind of on a clock until that EAP runs out, and you'll have to make that business decision. And champions really help with this testing process. So as I said before, champions can act as that focus group, and we recommend doing user interviews with them in the different roles to understand their typical tasks on a daily basis and start to identify some generalized tasks. We all, join Teams meetings if in our knowledge worker community, and we all will need to summarize that and gather our action. So that might be a very generalized task you can test with lots of different people, whereas there might be very specialized tasks that only certain people will do as well. So we need to identify high importance tasks where Copilot can be used, and we can do this by measuring, in the process we're doing with customer at the moment, we've measured frequency of tasks, duration and criticality each out of 5, and then anything that goes between the 10 and 15 mark, when you add that together, we've called those the red-rooted tasks that we think are really critical and can drive some real insight. We will then work with our champion community to schedule these A/B testing task completions. On the call, we'll introduce them to this approach and say, look, you're going to complete the task, and hopefully it's something they're doing in their day-to-day, right? We don't want to shoehorn this in when it's not realistic. But if they're doing a task already, we'll do it with and without Copilot and measure against the 5 metrics that we saw on the previous slide. We will record those key metrics with them. There's some nuances to this around whether or not we stay with them as they do the task, and some thoughts around preventing the observer effect when you observe someone doing a task. So often we will do this as a kind of unmoderated, they go away and they self-report. Other times we might be actually starting and stopping the clock ourselves to capture things like the time metric. And ultimately, we will then score the task completion against key metrics with and without Copilot. That's task taken, time taken, quality, maybe even the cognitive effort required, i.e., how much brain strain, I guess, am I doing on this task with and without Copilot? And if I'm reducing cognitive effort here, maybe I've got more time for somewhere to innovate or create in another area of my role. So that's the kind of A/B testing approach. And you can see how getting that deep dive understanding of roles, and you might have done this with some persona-based work before, but I think redoing this with a champion community who have Copilot and start to link together tasks with where Copilot intersects with those tasks in the different apps is going to be really critical to setting this up for success and starting to capture that data and measuring impact Copilot can have. And champions can really drive that level of insight to be able to do this. So a little bit later than we planned, but we still have some time for questions. We want to just do a quick summary, and Joe's just going to summarize where we've got to, and kind of all the key things where champions really enable us with this Copilot journey. Jo, you're on mute.
I am on mute. I'm going to get around to this, go through this nice and quickly so we can get around to some questions. But effectively what we hope you what's come out from today is, we really do think that having that strong champion community who really understand what their roles are and can really get to work on this is just critical to having a really great Copilot rollout. Oh, not coming up. Here we go. So first of all, when it comes to onboarding and identifying those champions, do make sure that you've got passionate champions. Whether they're initially passionate or you've made them passionate is up to you, but really think about having them across that range of roles, different titles, different levels in the organisation. Consider using that EAP group as your champions. And effectively, a big part of engaging them is just kind of boasting the benefits of being a champion, boasting what they're going to get out of this, boasting that this is a really hot topic right now, and actually this is something they're going to get early insight to that other people would really like to get their hands on if they could. When it comes to managing our champions, we are there to create that community of experts. I think it's really important to have that fail-safe space, exactly what Katie said. Don't worry about getting this wrong. It's not there to be something that's right or wrong. It's there to support you in your role, to save you time and effort. Just go and have a play with it and see how that works for you, whilst also sharing back your lessons learned with the group as well. And of course, bringing in that competition where we can so that people stay motivated and stay in touch with their co-champions as well. And lastly, when it comes to that testing piece, do think about how you're going to measure ROI early. This is something we talk about across all of our projects, but I think with Copilot, we are aware it is an investment. It's, it's not something you're just going to invest in lightly. So it's really thinking about where you're going to get the most benefit across your organisation and what roles and how you're going to measure that going forwards. Do you rely on that champions group to really help you do that as well, and to come up with some of those kind of initial that use case effectively, and bringing that into the business case for how you're ultimately going to sell this to your organisation as a really great tool to have. Thank you so much for listening. We actually have way more content than we thought we were going to talk through today. But yeah, we would love to open up some questions. I have seen some come into the chat. Katie, I guess if I just start at the top, we predicted this one would probably come. When it comes to champions, what's a good ratio of champions to end users? Generally across WM, when we talk about champions, we would tend to say kind of 10% of your end user to champion kind of ratio. So 1 to 9 is 10%, is it not? No, 1 to 10, sorry. So yeah, thinking about making sure that you've got enough people, and again, just that stretch across the different roles is what I'm just going to keep going back to with Copilot. You can have loads and loads and loads of champions, but if you don't have them working across all the different tools and different types of tasks, then it's not going to be effective. But generally speaking, 10% is a good benchmark to be able to reach out to enough of the organisation.
We have one here around gamifying, which I think we have spoken to a little bit, and it's kind of balancing that piece. The question is, would you recommend gamifying champion participation? I think we would certainly say yes. I think that certainly helps with engagement, and that's what we've seen the most active and enabled champion communities in work in the past. But there is a nuance here, which the person who submitted the question said that their champions can be a bit overworked because they tend to be the most eager early adopters anyway, and tend to be kind of a bit overloaded. So we're trying to think of ways to kind of engage them, especially if they're if they are voluntold, which I've never heard that term before, but I absolutely love it. So Jo, have you got any thoughts on how the gamifying might ensure that people are kind of a bit more enabled and less kind of fewer asks of them perhaps, especially when they've got a lot on already?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about actually gamifying the testing side of things, because we have seen that sometimes I think getting people to volunteer to put their hands up to come and do that testing and take the time out of their day can be a little bit of a stretch for them, and it's not always necessarily the most exciting thing to get involved with. I think if there was something we could do around kind of gamifying what happens from that testing? Is there something that we can start to incentivize people that might be, actually, you know what, the more time you can save when you do this A to B testing as well is going to contribute to a score that goes off somewhere. So I guess I'm thinking more naturally down the sort of competition type route than necessarily a gamifying something here. But it's certainly something I'd like to kind of look into and think about how we could create even more kind of gaming opportunities around this. I might be a case of, you know, if you try out something in different areas and you can kind of score points on some way of kind of testing out things in different areas, or perhaps you can, I don't know, I'm almost picturing, we talked Katie about that kind of catchphrase type thing where it's like you pull the puzzle together as you start to tick off different areas, and perhaps you do one thing and it opens it up and it reveals something. So just start to create a little bit of fun along that as well.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that not all champions have to be constant. Like there'll be some kind of standard minimum requirements, especially if those are people who are voluntold, I guess, where, you know, people will need to come and drop in, and we'll make some asks around cascading messages to their function. But it might not be that everybody needs to be involved, as Joe said, in the A/B testing all the time. Maybe there are elements of the champion experience that they can volunteer for rather than voluntold for, so that we're not asking things of everyone all the time. And I have seen it work well before, where if you've got, let's say, 300 people in your first set of licenses and you've got 30 champions, that we focus in on you know, a third of those, and we do a bit of a rotation. So you have some tick along tasks for everyone, and then you have a kind of a major week of you know, some A/B testing and tasks every 3 weeks where you have a bit of a focus in on you. So we're not asking, you know, them to integrate that into their work week every single week, because that can sometimes be tricky, especially depending on time of year. And we can also do that around different pinch points for different functional areas as well. We've got one here around, someone said they didn't participate in the EAP, so the champions are getting the tool at the same time as regular users. How do we get extra training to champions without overwhelming them? I don't think that's too much of a concern. I think that has been the experience of lots of people on the EAP as well. So lots of people sort of set off their 300 people and then set up a focus group afterwards. I think everybody needs that baseline training anyway. So I don't think you have to do that in advance. You don't have to, you know, train your champions prior to, especially with something like Copilot that's evolving so quickly. With something like a Teams launch in the past, we might have had that capability to get them kind of early access. I think we can have everyone getting a certain level of capability on the standard training and briefings that they would get with the whole audience on the pilot, but we'll also have that supplementary sessions where you can build additional knowledge. So you can do that in tandem. I don't think it's a huge problem. You can still build out a champion community. They don't have to be weeks ahead of everyone else in terms of involvement with Copilot.
Yeah, and for me, Katie, I think when you talk about training with champions, there's two different routes you want to go down. One is training in obviously what the tool is and what it does. And the other is training in terms of what is your role as a champion and what do we need you to do to help us make this successful. And I think that second part of the training, which is, you know, you're a champion, what do we need you to do, can come at any point, and we can roll that out to people, and it is something we need them to understand for their role to be successful. But perhaps if you're talking to really time poor people, when it comes to that, okay, what do I need to actually know about Copilot and how I can use it in a particular tool? Perhaps we could break that down to something more bite-sized. It might be that we've got some much shorter sessions that are available as and when it suits you, something you can click into that might be, you know, Copilot in PowerPoint. Here's a short 5-minute video, or here's a short 15-minute call where we're going to get together and talk about or show how we can use Copilot in a specific tool, and then you could join another one. So it means that people aren't having to spend time listening to Copilot working in an area that perhaps they just don't use. Perhaps in my role, I don't use Excel a lot, and I don't want to spend my time listening about what I can do with Copilot in Excel or Power Platform. So we break it down so you can just learn about the bits suitable for you to help manage that kind of sense of overwhelm and too much information as well.
Absolutely. And this ties into maybe some of the training being that scenario based or function based or app based, sorry, as Joe said, where you might have a short playlist of sort of 5-minute video bits of content on working with Excel, and people can work through that at their own pace when they have the time. And we can have a view across the champions who are engaging on the Excel training specifically in their functional areas. But it might be that you know, there'll be a bit of a rush at that after the financial results for the quarter have been processed in the finance team, because they didn't have time to do that before. So we can set out kind of expectations over the 3-month period and all the materials they have available, and some of the stuff they can work through at their own pace.
Absolutely. I think that's the last of our questions, and we do have just 1 minute left. So I guess if we just wrap up and say thank you so much for joining this webinar today. We hope you took some useful snippets of knowledge away with you. We do have another one coming up on the 5th of December. You can scan the QR code here to go straight to the registration link, and it's all about getting the most out of your Copilot licenses. I think, Katie, are you not on that one as well?
I am indeed, Jo. We're handing the
Fountain of
webinar baton
knowledge.
between us over the last month, aren't we? Yeah, I'll be leading that session. Yeah.
So yeah, we'd love to see you there again. Please feel free to register that, send that over to any colleagues that might be interested as well. And ultimately, just thank you so much for your time today.
Very much. Have a wonderful day, guys.